Welcome to Solomoriah Speaks, episode 21, Polytheism. I was watching the Grungeon Master's video just the other day, and I just watched some of it again to refresh my memory, where he's talking about polytheism and specifically how religions and role-playing games aren't normally really polytheism, aren't really historically accurate polytheism. I found his topic very interesting. I agreed with pretty much everything he said. My experiences have been the same as he describes. I want to stop at this point and throw a caveat in here. I'm talking about religion and role-playing games. I'm talking specifically about how people in role-playing games experience religion, how the characters experience it, and in the process of this I'm going to be talking about historical religions and mythology from the real world a little bit. Religion is often a tricky topic to discuss with respect to role-playing games. I can't really give you a lot of advice about it for your own games, except to just be careful and be respectful of your players. Having said that, I'm going to forge on and hopefully not offend anybody too much. The main thesis of the Grungeon Master's video has to do with the way that polytheism worked in the real world. If you were an ancient Greek man who sailed, who spent his time at sea, it wouldn't be surprising to think that you'd spend a lot of time visiting the temple of Poseidon to make appropriate sacrifices and prayers for good fortune at sea, that he will favor you, or alternately that he won't pay attention to you at all, which I suppose could be just as good a thing for many people, that to keep you safe while you're at sea. Hold on, don't knock the camera, buddy. Cat's bothering the tripod. If you were such a person, and you also, say, owned a farm, or perhaps your brother owned a farm, you would still make sacrifices or pray to the appropriate God for that purpose. And I'm going to admit to you at this point, I don't know. If your wife was pregnant, there's a God for that. And you would make sacrifices to all of those. In an RPG, from the very beginning, when I first got into role-playing games long ago, in RPGs, it was common for every player character to have one god that they pretty much were expected to worship more or less all the time. We were actually told we should make a decision about this early on when we're generating the character, which gods they might follow. And this, your mileage will vary with your experiences in games. Some game masters took this more seriously, some less. But in general, that was the understanding. Henotheism is the name for that. The understanding or belief that there are more than one God, but you only worship one. You only follow one. In terms of the real world, I gather it's not something that was very common. In general, people just didn't believe that way. Pantheists, polytheists, believed in many gods who had various functions, and you sacrificed to whichever god you were praying to that relevant to whatever outcome you wanted. You would pray for whatever kind of favor you wanted, or disfavor to your enemies if that was the case. And that was how it worked in the real world. I'm going to talk about some practical examples. It's really what this video is about. I became aware that this was odd years ago, and considered in my own campaign how things really should work. Should the gods, be the way that they have been presented in D&D games forever, or should we go for a more historical view of things? I felt like the more historical view was more natural, more appropriate, more sensible. For the players. It would make more sense. It would feel more immersive. And so I tried to go in that direction. And it's actually reflected in my campaign world. There is a historical moment in the campaign world of Glane, my primary campaign, where the followers of several of the polytheistic religions gathered together and recognized the common roots of their beliefs. These were all from the same basic ethnic backgrounds, same basic ancestors, but they had spread out over the continent, and their beliefs had varied, and their gods had varied, and they came to the conclusion that the god of thunder, the god of the storm, was the god of the storm for everyone. The fact that the stories told might be different in different traditions was simply a mystery that only the gods could explain, and it wasn't a problem for mortals to figure out. The father god, the mother goddess, whatever nature god there might be, whatever gods there might be for various functions or positions in the universal hierarchy, they were the same. That was their belief, that they were the same regardless of your initial traditions. This is referred to as the Church of the Triune because they picked three specific gods that were important in all of their religions: the god of justice, the god of wisdom, and the goddess of life. And these triune gods were seen as the heads of this pantheon, heads of the unified pantheon that they followed. Player characters outside of clerics, player characters are expected to simply pray to whoever seems appropriate to pray to, or ignore the gods if they want, which is not at all uncommon, and generally doesn't have a lot of repercussions as long as you don't badmouth them. Clerics are expected to follow one primary god mostly, but they all understand the importance of the pantheon as a pantheon, and the various clerics, while maybe specializing in one or maybe a handful of related gods, will pray to any of the gods of the pantheon for the appropriate favor that they might need, for the spells they might need to acquire. This is how I approached it. There is another common belief. No, I'm not going to say belief. Another common pattern or trope, if you will, in role-playing games and in a lot of fantasy media in general. The idea being that the gods are powered by their worshippers, and the more worshippers a god has, and the more effort those worshippers make to worship that god, the more powerful that god will be. I understand the attractiveness of this idea, and even to a certain extent the appearance that it might align with, some historical view of reality, if you twist your mind around just right to look at it. But I decided, from my perspective, that that wasn't true in my games. The gods of Blaine in particular are gods whether you care about them or not, and they're powerful more or less based on themselves, based on their position in the universe, and not based on whether people believe in them or worship them or fear them. A god that is forgotten is still a god, still has power, still has whatever power he or she had, and typically gods become forgotten not because they lose power, but because they themselves lose interest in the mortal world for some reason. They move away into some other realm beyond the understanding of mortals, and they might be able to be called back. This is where worshippers come in. Worshippers might be able to attract the attention of one of these sleeping gods, one of these wandering gods, and bring them back to attention, bring them back to the mortal world, and this might be to the benefit or the detriment of people in general, or to the character in the specific sense. But this is my point, and this relates to an item that the Grungeon Master made a comment about, that in general, in ancient religions, in ancient mythology, the gods are necessary. Even the gods that you would like to avoid. One of the examples he gives is the Hindu goddess Shiva, the god of destruction, the patron of destruction. Because destruction is necessary in the real world, you must destroy things to rebuild them. So all of these gods are necessary for human scale purposes. In other words, humans need these things to exist, to need these things to matter, to be managed by someone in the heavens so that they have someone to pray to. And this humanocentric, this mortal-centered view of the gods is another thing that I kind of avoid, that I kind of resist. There are gods in the pantheon of Blaine who are not quote-unquote necessary. They are served only by madmen and evil creatures. They are not generally loved by the populace or reasonably feared by them. There is a god of the undead. No human wants undead normally, with the exception, I suppose, of necromancers and a few other mad people. Generally speaking, humans are not fond of the undead, but there is a god of the undead in my campaign world, and that god is not there because he is necessary. That god is there because he's a god, and that's what he decided he likes. There is a goddess of pain. While one could argue that pain is necessary in general, she is more personal than that with respect to pain. Pain inflicted intentionally is her real domain, is her real area of influence. And she is the sister of the goddess of healing, twin daughters of the goddess of life. She turned to pain for her own reasons, and she is not really considered necessary. She does have followers. There are followers of pain. Really shouldn't surprise anybody these days. But she doesn't reach the same level of necessariness that you'd find in the kind of, well, in historic religions and so forth. I did deviate in that direction because I felt it made the gods more interesting. They have their own goals and their own interests, and the world is a playground to them in some cases. So it's how I approached it. I'm not making this video, incidentally, to give guidance to anyone. This is more of a sharing of ideas, a sharing of approaches, of views of how to address something in the game. One of the things that is very odd about D&D, that is very odd about fantasy games in that genre, is the fact that it's a medieval fantasy game. It is a fantasy game set in a fantasy version of the Middle Ages. In general, some worlds are more alien than that, but the original basis, knights in armor, kings and princes and princesses and queens, as it were, all of these concepts, all this feudalism, it's based on the European Middle Ages predominantly. And yet the influence of the church, of Christianity from the real world, Christianity was a key formative engine, a key controller of how things worked in the Middle Ages. It would be wrong to say that the church was fully in control, because they absolutely were not. But the interests of the church were very important, and the monotheistic view of reality that the church presented was important to the social order, to the way society worked. So it's odd to me in some ways that we have games that were based on the Middle Ages, but that chose to use an ancient view of religion rather than a medieval view. Not wrong specifically, just unusual, just an odd approach. I have long suspected, but I don't have the historical knowledge to prove this, but I've long suspected that the choice to go with what were at the time seen as dead religions, the Greeks, the Romans, the Norse, to a lesser extent other European-centered religions, and the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptian religion, choice of religions that were functionally dead was probably, in my opinion, done to avoid controversy. You couldn't be seen as insulting someone if it was very unlikely that they actually shared the religion that they actually followed the religion that you were presenting in the game. To a certain extent, presenting religion in the game could be seen as diminishing or belittling it if you're not very careful how you approach it. And I've suspected, but again, I cannot prove, that the choice to go with ancient religions might have been to avoid that specific kind of problem. It didn't work. We still had the satanic panic. We still had all that nonsense anyway. But that's been my theory on the matter anyway. When I created the Western Lands as a very sketchy background world for use in modules and adventures for the Basic Fantasy Project, I was cognizant of this situation. I was thinking about the lack of a central church, the lack of a organized religion, a monotheistic belief system. I was thinking about that, and I came up with the idea for the Church of Ptah, the monotheistic church imported by the Erd when they expanded their empire into the Western Lands. And which religion is now basically centered in the Western Lands after the fall of the empire itself. There are the followers of Ptah, the Church of Ptah, and there is the Church of Ptah Reformed, which has in turn turned away from the somewhat materialistic activity, so much materialistic face that the Church of Ptah has. There is historical precedent for that in the Catholic Church. There was definitely an era when Catholic priests and bishops and so forth absolutely went about in finery. Their vows of poverty applied only to their personal possessions, but the church had plenty and showed it off. They showed it off quite a bit. It's a factor in old stories and in medieval historical fiction, as well as simply in the historical record. But I looked at it from that perspective. And then, of course, there were the religions, the polytheistic religions, present in the area before the Urds came. And the history presented in the Western Lands, those religions banded together. They did not take the same approach that I went with the Triune in Glane. The followers of these different polytheistic religions, they call them the 100, even though there's far more than 100 gods involved. They accept the reality of all the gods, of all the peoples, regardless of if they line up with each other or not, and deliberately avoiding arguments about whether or not two gods are the same god or different gods. Their primary goal in banding together and describing themselves as a group was simply to stand against the influence of the churches of Ptah. Just how I approach things. I wanted to be able to present a medieval world with medieval aspects to it all the way through their society, but I also wanted to retain more primitive peoples and their many gods. Old swords and sorcery stories, well, even new swords and sorcery stories, frequently have the temples of the various sometimes forgotten gods and so forth. In the Western Lands, I have avoided the question of whether the gods are powered or fueled by their worshippers. One of the other things that I have to admit I've disliked about D&D in the past, much as I'm a fan of the game in general, is the diminishing of the power of the gods. You bought the Deities and Demigods book. I've got a couple of copies of it actually around. The gods have hit points. The gods have combat statistics. You can look at them and analyze them and see, well, how many 10th, 12th, 15th level characters do I need to take down a god? What kind of magic do I need to acquire? What kind of weapons do we need to have? How many people are we going to lose in the process of killing off a minor or a major god? And with the understanding that the gods may simply be forced back to their own plane and so forth. But even in that situation, you could chase a god to its own plane. and murder it there, and that god was dead. Canonically, generally speaking, that's how it worked, and God should be bigger than that, in my opinion, my personal opinion. God should be bigger than that. He should be more resilient than that. You should never meet anything greater than an avatar of the god, where when the avatar dies, the god is diminished not at all, other than perhaps losing a little face because his or her or their avatar has been defeated. But I feel like the gods should be more powerful than that, that they should be bigger and more out of reach of player characters than that, and that's how I've approached things. In the Western lands, and it's pointed out in BF on Morgansport, where I first presented the Western lands, all the clerics of all the gods get spells. They all receive spells. The followers of Ta, on both sides, Ta and the Reformers, all of the followers of all the 100 gods, their priests receive spells. They have access to divine magic. So there is an argument to be made that those gods are all real. But there are also atheists. There are those who firmly believe that none of these gods are real, that they're all made up, that they're all absolutely fictional, and that the magic granted by the gods is actually just another form of the same kind of magic that wizards perform, but accessed somehow through an excess of faith rather than through knowledge and learning and so forth. They believe that the prayers don't necessarily reach any gods, that the magic performed by priests does not necessarily involve such things. It's simply a matter of someone who has faith being able to access these powers to speak with the dead, or to grant healing, or to whatever, summon a spiritual hammer, if you will. These features, these powers granted by the gods, according to those atheists, are simply powers that people access because of their faith. It is, however, true that none of the atheists have any ability to perform those magics. They simply don't have the ability to perform divine magic at all. The fact that they have no belief puts those powers beyond them. That's where I was going with this. And it may not matter to you in your game. This level of world building, dealing with the religions, it can absolutely just be a facade, a light skin over part of your campaign world that your player characters may not even care about. It may not be a big deal to them outside of getting healing, getting curses removed, and so forth. It may not matter to them, and that's fine. Your campaign world does not need to delve deeply into religion. I've already gone deeper into the religions of the Western lands than the written material does, just in this video. So, I'm not telling you what to do. But I want to point out to you that in every area of game design, in every area of world building, in every area of story creation, even though, as I say, we are not creating story in an old school game. Story happens when the players enter the world. But still, in every aspect of these things, following the same model that everybody else has over and over again gets boring. Doing the same thing all the time can become boring. Looking at various aspects of your campaign world, of your adventures, with a critical eye towards, let's do something a little different this time. Let's see what it would be like if it was this way or that way. I think that's important. I think variety is, as they have long said, the spice of life. And certainly for your game, it can be the spice for your game. I think I've covered everything I intended to cover. I do recommend the Grungeon Masters video. I will drop a link for that video in the description. And I recommend you all take a look at it. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.